All right. Welcome to the Hyper Technical Steering Committee meeting, June 1st. It's hard to believe it's already June. It's crazy. Just to catch everyone up on kind of the roadmap. We, in May, launched a new website, and we're working on kind of a workshop. Trip and I have been working on a workshop that kind of showcases Hyper in a real world app. And we completed the API kind of first pass, I would say, last week. And now we're starting to look at the front end and scope out some user stories, and then look to put a front end on top of. And then the app is this kind of movie review app. But Trip, you want to add any kind of details to that?
Yeah, it's basically, you have a movie, letting the users add their reviews to the movie and then letting people react, thumbs up, thumbs down to those reviews. So it's a concept is build the whole app, and then as part of the workshop, you would build the middle tier connecting the Hyper to the UI that's already there. So you can fill in the middle.
Yeah. So what we're doing is actually building the full app, and then we'll go back to construct the workshop with kind of fill in the blank. So you kind of build the middle piece, and you'll as you take the workshop, you'll already have the front end, and of course you'll already have Hyper. So all you have to do is kind of work through that middle tier, or the API tier, or the application layer, whatever you want. And if you want to check out what we've done to date, I put the repo in the show notes. But I think it's looking pretty good. And again, very much discovery. We're going to find some pain points and work on refining those. Probably come down as change requests to Hyper. So that's cool. And then the other item, refining the dev service for Hyper and getting the documentation up to date, and probably going to take another look at the documentation or style of documentation. Distinguished engineer from Cyprus, Gleb, actually posted a pretty awesome blog post on just how to think about documentation. And I think it's worth, unless anyone disagrees, I think it's worth using as kind of a guide for our documentation. I'll paste it in the chat, but he's got some really good, clear concepts, and a really good layout on what to put on the website, what to put in your kind of guides and workshops, and what to put in your blogs. So if you guys get a chance, I would recommend reading that and maybe providing your input on that. And let's see if if you guys disagree or agree or whatever, so that we can improve our documentation. I met with a group today that's going to be taking over one of the projects of Hyper. One of our customers or clients, they're switching the development team. And so that was kind of cool. Got to do some onboarding today with this other team. And I think we'll get a lot of good feedback from that. One of the things that they noted, and it's a team, kind of an agency, like group, and they noted, yeah, this architecture is a little different than what we're used to. I was like, well, there's kind of three things to keep in mind is, this should improve testability, make testing easier, make it easier to maintain, and, kind of reduce unintentional technical debt. So I think they seem pretty excited from the gist of it, but they were like, wow, this is totally different than what we're used to. So thought that was some good feedback.
Did they give any examples as to like what they were comparing it to, like what they've worked with in the past?
Yeah, most of their stuff is very database centric, very I would say model view controller kind of style from what I gathered. And very, very much with like business logic kind of spread everywhere, either like heavy on the client or heavy on the back end. But the lead developer did understand what it was, and he referenced how good the documentation was, how clean the code was, and said that it was really easy to follow. The only thing that he had trouble following was the way we implemented webhooks in this app, and kind of the queue service, because it is kind of hard to follow, because they create a queue with a target, and the API layer passes that back to Hyper, because the API layer is serverless, so it can't maintain any state. So it passes it back to Hyper. And then when a job is invoked, Hyper calls the API and the API calls the client. So it's kind of a couple of steps there. And I'm going to, once he gets a little further down, I'm gonna walk through the sequence diagram with him. But that's just not, hooks and events are not super clear when you look at code, right? It doesn't show you the path. So you need a little bit more visualization to get out of that, I think. But
Okay.
that was good. Again, they said that the documentation was good. Still, like I said, I need to do better, and really kind of clean up some of the old stuff and better define kind of the three pathways you can run Hyper, two pathways, whether you want to run self-hosted or like local development, or run on the the dashboard process, or the little developer host. So I've got some work to do there just to tie that all together. I still have like hyper63.com and some places in the docs, and need to change it all to Hyper.io and all that. It's like changing names is it's no fun. But it's great because Hyper is a cool name. So that's really kind of the current status for me. June, we're going to be looking at maybe trying to launch kind of the dev service and show the workshop. And I know Casey has been working on the DynamoDB adapter. Casey, you have any updates to share there?
Yeah, I can share whatever at the end. All of the routes are working. I haven't tested the three that I sent for. I think it's a bulk list and query. They're all just, like stub functions right now. But, yeah, everything works pretty well. And
Cool.
I can talk a little bit about both some of the implementation, but also some of the things that were easy versus the things that were more challenging with sort of getting started. And also thanks a lot to Tyler for setting up that skeleton. I think that helped a lot. And I don't know if you guys have already been thinking this, but it might be nice for contributors to have like an NPX create hyper data adapter, because I really think that just having that boilerplate there, like,
Yeah.
prevented me from having to figure out a lot of stuff. So, you know, it was fairly easy once I figured out how to actually start the development version of Hyper and where to put things for it to just start working. So that was very big. I think that would be a huge benefit. And
Yeah,
Tyler,
no, that's awesome input. One simple way to do it in, you know, code generation is another subject, but I really like what GitHub has started doing with their templates. So that might be a lightweight approach, is to just create a repo of that skeleton and make it a template. And then when you create your new repo, you can just inherit from that template.
right. And Tyler mentioned too, which is a good point, that a lot of the tests are basically going to be the same for all of them. So, you know, that could be part of that template. So
Yeah. And that would be cool if the tests were already written and all you had to do is run them.
right.
Yeah, I think, I mean, because we're using the ports and adapters pattern, and all the tests, I mean, first of all, like the Zod, just the wrapping code written in Zod provides a lot of the testing for the inputs and the outputs, and that could just be tests in and of itself, and then just some tests around each API, like each API on that specific port, and then that test suite could just be reused for every single adapter for that port. And
Yep.
so the only tests that the adapter developer would have to write are just things like branches within the implementation, perhaps, and it's basically it. I think it would cut down on a lot of code adapter developers would have to write, and it would just be nice to be able to say, like, if your adapter passes the test suite, then your adapter can be used in Hyper. Here's the test suite, sort of deal.
100%. That's really cool.
So I hope to have this pushed and finished today, but I had a family emergency come up this weekend, so I haven't looked at this closely for the last few days. I did test all of the routes in Postman this morning on Hyper, and they were all good. And I noticed one thing that I saw is in the Hyper IO docs, the create an index request body didn't work. I had to do something different. So
Okay,
do you want me to share that?
sure.
Okay. So basically, this is what it had for creating the fields for the index, and it didn't work for me when it was nested in this index key. I had to just put it in its own,
Got it.
on its own level. So
That's
that
just
was,
probably a typo. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's the only Hyper IO documentation thing that I ran across. So the Hyper IO stuff, once I got it connected into Hyper, was very easy, worked very quickly. but figuring out how to connect it to Hyper was not as well documented. And I guess for probably good reason. The main priority is probably more the users versus the contributors. But it was mainly just for me that there may be a place to go find stuff, but it was mainly just sort of like poking around and trial and error until I
Yeah.
figured out. And the way that I ended up doing it is not the way that I would do it again, which is I basically cloned the entire Hyper 63 and am editing removed the Git folder, and I'm editing the dev image and just
Right.
pointing it somewhere. I'm assuming that there's an easier way to do that, to just grab it somewhere. But
Yeah, no, that's a good point. There's not a lot of documentation out there. I've got a repo that I'll share in the chat, but this is a repo of like a standalone Hyper where you can just install the core, the Express app, the ports and the adapters, and then create a config. And basically you've got an index.js file with a couple of lines, and that's pretty much it. But definitely need to document that.
let's see some other random things. So the hyperconfig, I don't care if anyone sees these secrets. I did notice, so it's using the env, like process.env, but .env is not required as a dependency. And I saw that for the default, it's just being passed in the command line. I don't know that that's realistic for this. I don't know if I may have been overthinking this, or if there's, essentially my question is, how would you be imagining, instead of putting the actual string here, say, where am I getting the env info from?
Yeah, so depending on what cloud, you have different ways of storing environment variables. So most of the time you would just pull from process.env and write them there.
Okay.
But if you have options for a better way that works across clouds, happy to.
I may have been asking the wrong question. So
Okay.
if I have like a .env here, which I do, you're not using any external library to grab it. You're just saying process.env whatever.
Right. So there's a couple ways. I use the .env module,
Yeah.
and you can run that on the command line with a -r. So you can do like -r .env/config, and then it would load your .env file in at the command line. Or you can just require it at the top of your index.js,
Right.
like as kind of the first thing that runs, and you just do like require .env .config and open paren, close paren. But I prefer to do it on the script, just because I don't want my .env file, if it accidentally gets into production, I don't want it to load. I want it to recognize the environment from production.
Right. And I usually do it the second method that you said, but I just noticed that there was no .env module here, so I didn't know if there is a particular reason for that. I just basically didn't want to mess with it when I didn't know there is some rationale behind it.
In that dev image, I think the, yeah, I'm not, I think because there's no, in the dev image, it was using kind of memory and disk, there's no environment variables to share, right? Like, there's just data and a secret. So if you look in the micro image, it should be a little bit different.
Okay. Good to know. This was just the one that I happened to land on. Let's see. I mean, is there anything in particular that you'd want me to show?
Maybe show some of the adapter code.
Okay. The only sort of strange thing that I can think of right away, or not strange, but just slightly different, is for DynamoDB, there are two sort of main clients for it. One is the doc client, which is basically more abstract than the regular DynamoDB thing. So that's what I use for the, I think the for doc CRUD stuff. And then DynamoDB basically can do anything, but the doc client just has a simpler interface. So the only sort of different thing is I'm just passing those as one thing to the adapter and grabbing them over here and using them wherever.
Are you using version 2 or version 3 of the AWS SDK?
Version 3, I believe,
Okay.
but I didn't specify. And I saw that that was in the original template that Tyler had made.
Okay.
So I'll go ahead and add that before doing a pull request. Let's see. A lot of these are fairly straightforward. This is my first time using Croc, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are a couple of awkward usages. But for the most part, the documents were pretty straightforward except for update. The only thing for update is you have to generate a string. So there's just a helper function that will probably eventually be in its own file. Let's see. And let's see. The index, I don't remember the specifics here. It's been a few days, but there are a lot of different parameters, and I'm guessing that we're just going to use a relatively small subset of them. But I mean, even things like read capacity units, write capacity units, I'm just going to put the lowest number here. I doubt that's something that we'd ever want in the interface, but I don't really know there.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I think that's a good start.
Let's see. Yeah, and then these three have some like basically things to think through before implementing. If I remember correctly, the main one that sort of made me pause was for list documents. There's a sort feature, and because DynamoDB has that sort key, which I'm not using right now, to do a sort, I'd have to implement the sort key, which would then make it so the partition key alone being unique was not enough. So that would potentially require rethinking how everything else was implemented as well.
Okay.
I believe that was the main pause to just sort of move on to something else. Let's see. Any particular ones that you'd like to see?
See some cool BIMAP action.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
I mean, some of these are like super straightforward, like
Yeah.
retrieve, all that stuff.
I mean, it all looks good. Very, very clean.
Cool. And yeah, I'll have to write some tests for it. One thing, looking at the tests, is this the first adapter that's exclusively like a vendor specific cloud thing? Like this runs in AWS, that there's not like I mean, you can run it locally, but I don't know that it's the norm. We're doing like, I guess it might not matter. I haven't done mock tests with tape, but
Yeah, so there's a library called mock fetch that essentially allows you to capture um, any HTTP calls going out and mocking them, right? So you're mocking right at the edge so that you can run your test without having to have um, an Amazon Dynamo instance.
okay.
Yeah. And like the adapter itself, it gets past or I guess the adapter factory, it gets past an instance of like DynamoDB instantiated object from the AWS SDK. So since you're using that, you could just mock that and pass it as the dependency. And
Okay.
so, and you could just, yeah, because it's just passed as an argument. So it's just good old dependency injection.
Okay. Cool. And you guys have some references for some other ones, so I'll probably check some of those out.
Yeah, I think most of them are using like fetch, and so we've used mock fetch for mocking those calls so they don't actually go over the wire. But in this case, since this is using an SDK, like that is specifically why we pass it as a dependency to the factory so that it can be mocked and as part and just make testing easier.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that there's anything else in particular to show. Unless, so don't know if this is the case for some of the other ones. If I remember correctly, you can only create one index at a time. A weird edge case for that would be somebody tried to create multiple indexes, they would get a false, even though they passed the right stuff.
Okay.
So anyway,
You mean what particular case is that? If you're trying to for the index documents?
yeah, if you're trying to like create multiple indexes at the same time, you basically just can't. That's it.
A limitation that you're saying that's a limitation of Dynamo, or
Yeah.
yeah,
So
I
like,
mean if the API, if the Hyper API supports like creating multiple indexes, then that would be where like within that method we'd have to have there would be some way to if possible like get around that limitation for DynamoDB, whether that's like create an index then like separately and then create the next index as opposed to trying to create them at the same time. That would be sort of like the internal logic of the implementation of this function. If I'm understanding what
yeah,
the limitation here.
Like write an adapter, right?
Say again.
Like write an adapter.
in
Something
this
that
case, I mean less that I would like that there would be a new function to create multiple indexes, more if I happen to hit this function twice, like if I think it's maybe this one. Yeah. Well, maybe not. Can't remember. One of these is oh, this is the thing to create an index. If I click this twice and I change one of them, this is actually pretty fast because there's basically no documents and very simple. But like if I hit it twice in succession, I would probably get a failure on the second one, even though it was a valid API call.
The
That's as
failure
good
being because the index already exists.
because it's in the process of creating one, and it will just fail if you try to create another one at the same time. I don't think it's going to be a particularly common error. It's just something that while I was coming across it, probably worth mentioning.
Hmm.
You,
That is an interesting.
you could, if there's a way to check to see if it's still processing the previous call,
Yeah,
or if you get an error on the subsequent call,
right.
you could have, you could send back some sort of message saying too many requests. In other
I
words,
mean,
you're hitting it too fast.
Right.
there's a way to. I mean, it would definitely be feasible to like stack the promises
Mm-hmm.
and like kind of store that as like I'm just like spitballing here, like it's like local state in the adapter. Like if there's like an index being created, you like store that promise and then chain any additional calls to create index onto that promise chain. And so they'll just go sequentially. But then that doesn't take into account like if there's multiple instances of hyper or something like that.
Yeah, and I'm fairly sure that you'd get a consistent error response back that you can check every time. So I don't know if that's, if that's common enough to be worth that logic. It probably is. But that actually does remind me, when I did get errors, I don't know if this is something that I may have been doing the response incorrectly, or if this is just what was to be expected. I don't think it always, like I would get okay, false, but I would not necessarily get the error code. And I don't know if that's intentional so that you don't see what's going on. How's that handled? Like, what's the thought process there?
It needs some work. I think it's it's got to be reviewed and consistent. I think like there's a couple in there that uh, there's some retry logic for errors, but some of them, some things shouldn't retry, right? If it's 404 not found, it shouldn't retry. It should just return 404.
Yeah.
So there's some quirks in there that just need focus and to go through and make sure everything's consistent and returning the proper status code, returning the proper description for the status code, etc.
And I think there are a handful of things that would have solutions in the range of what Trip and Tyler both talked about, which is I think too, there's something with like, what was it? It was something with like creating duplicates. I think there's a lot of basically things to, you might have to have logic inside the adapter to check for duplicates, and maybe it would depend on the individual database. I'm assuming that's, I don't know how Hyper would handle that otherwise, actually. I mean, that's ideally an adapter specific implementation, would it not?
Yeah, I think it's just defining the so you've got the resolved side and then the rejected side. The rejected side from the adapter can pass a status, a message, and an okay, and just getting that standardized so that If the adapter doesn't pass a status, then, and it is an error, then it'll just like default to 500. Make the adapter be explicit about the status code. That's one thought, but open to other thoughts.
Okay. I guess that could also be argued to be better as a business logic use case as well. What do you want to do if someone tries to create a duplicate? Because maybe two people using the DynamoDB adapter would have a different idea of what you'd want to do in that case. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, normally would throw a 409 document conflict for the last person and let that person, that client deal with it. But you're right, there could be potentially other ways to go about it, I guess.
Yeah, I think overall it was a pretty good developer experience, given that there was like not much documentation to figure it out. So I think that once there's some like, either a simple tutorial or some like easy to follow docs on like where to basically start developing, I think it'll be pretty nice, because it was definitely cool and satisfying to just basically just made the functions first based on the schema, and was able to more or less just plug them into Hyper after that, and they just kind of started magically working, which was nice.
Cool.
But I think that's what I got.
Awesome. Tyler,
Cool.
you have any updates or comments?
And first of all, just Casey, it's looking great so far, and the questions that you're asking and sort of the outstanding, like what the error should look like, the conversation that we have here have been really valuable. So thanks for that and the work so far. I mean, as far as updates for me, I really enjoyed the session. Trip, Tom, and myself had last week. And that was good. But besides that, this is my last week at my current job, and it seems like they're really trying to squeeze every last bit of code out of me in this last week.
Just tell them you're a short timer. Tell them you're a short timer and that you're going to go get lunch.
Well, it seemed like things were ramping down, and then they were like, well, hold on, he actually is leaving. Let's get him to write lots of code.
Squeeze that turnip till it's dry.
Yeah. So, no real updates for me, though. Just really excited to get to solving some of these problems and acting on some of the feedback we've been getting. Really excited for it.
Awesome. Trip, any updates from your end?
You covered it with the movie workshop API and starting design on the front end. So that's what we've been working on lately.
Cool.
And I guess one thing, I mean, I did send this over to you, Tom, about Dapper, and just being able to, a couple folks that I've mentioned Hyper to, and sort of describing what it does. I've had two people say, oh, it kind of sounds like Dapper. And I've never used Dapper. And so maybe it's just me explaining Hyper poorly with respect to Dapper. But it might be worth like what you posted about like how the missions are different. I think like really driving that home, and like our vanity page or our documentation will help differentiate the two.
Yeah, I'm gonna, like I said, take that blog post as a guide, but again, there's several different products that we're like, and and there'll probably be more that other people will mention, oh, it's kind of like this, or it's kind of like that. And I think the easiest conversation to have, or at least I really like how Gleb put it, is the drills versus the holes analogy. Have you guys ever heard of that? Okay, good. So when you go to the store to pick out a drill, you're not thinking this brand or this brand. You're thinking about the hole you got to drill, right? You're thinking about the problem you're trying to solve. So his recommendation is, really focus on the problems that we're trying to solve and talk towards that. And again, making apps more easy to test, easy to maintain, minimizing unintentional technical debt. Those are kind of the holes, and Hyper is the drill for that. There may be other drills out there, but at the end of the day, that's the question, that I am I feel like this solution solves, right? Is keeping business logic separate from implementation details. At the end of the day, results in very highly testable things, like Casey said, we could have tests that work on every adapter and it's still the same test. That's a lot of code that we don't have to maintain if we have 20 different data adapters, right? It's all one test suite. And there's just little nuggets like that. Being able to work on an island building an adapter and not have to worry about the entire Hyper ecosystem. When you use Hyper to be able to solve problems without digging through Postgres documentation or digging through Amazon DB documentation, it's just Hyper documentation, and you don't really care what the end data point is. You're concerned about solving your problem. So I think Dapper is kind of this mesh event bus system, and it does do some things similar to us, but I don't think it shares our same mission. I think its mission is more of an integration mission of, you can write code in any language you want and glue it all together through this microservice architecture, no matter what language you use or what service you use. But I'll dig into more of Dapper. It's definitely a cool project, and I think there's a lot of value for certain use cases for it. But I do think we have kind of two different missions, if that makes sense.
No, I think it does. I mean, again, I haven't used Dapper, but I mean, given that we're such a small group, we're kind of people are going to be asking us about Hyper. We're kind of all in sales in a sense, and so
Yeah.
just being able to, like you said, there's people that do some of what we do. Being able to differentiate those and know the distinction, and it's clear for all of us, so that when it comes up in a conversation, we can definitely be like, oh, well, this is how Hyper's different. I think that'd be good to have.
Yeah, I'll work on a first draft of that, and then maybe you guys can take a crack at refining it, but just kind of a talking point summary, and of course it should echo in our documentation and website and stuff, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
We're all in sales.
Yeah, going back to the drill analogy, Hyper has the Hyper drill uses those nice big lithium ion batteries. Everyone else is those chromium nickel cad batteries.
That's right. No. And you could even take it to, the drill has bits and Hyper has adapters. Hyper may not have a zillion adapters yet, but the interchangeability is frictionless, right? To change out one adapter to another adapter or one bit to another bit.
It's more like a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
And like the handle's the same. You just flip out the piece that you need to use.
Yep. There you go. Well, cool beans. Thanks everyone for all the work. I am working on the swag shop to get the new graphics up, and I should have that by the end of this week. So we should have, new swag with the new logos and everything all Hyper. So I think that'll be cool. And that's all I have. I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll, touch base through Slack and catch up next time.
Sounds great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Great work, everybody.